Hey everyone, it's me again. I've been doing this video series called The Live Journey Through Borderline Personality Disorder. And the reason why I've been doing this little series of thoughts and sort of like journal food for thoughts through based experiences and my journey through borderline is to kind of break down the direct experience, where I see it comes from, what may be the root causes of borderline, um, and get into just promoting the fact that you can manage your BPD. I am living proof of that. I continue to have obviously traits that I still do, that I am working on and continue to work on, though there are many traits that I have already overcome. For example, being comfortable alone. Um, the other one is um, the other one is removing suicidal tendencies. I used to idolize with suicide all the time. Now I don't. Um, the other one is I've been sober off of all stimulants and all drugs, like hard drugs. And I don't deal with a alcoholism problem. Like I might go and have a drink once a month or something at a club, or have an after dinner party drink of wine or something, but I am not like an alcoholic. Um, and I am not, you know, having sexual promiscuous issues as well, in my current phase. Whereas before, I most definitely did have all of these sorts of problems. That included things like rage as well. Rage of like screaming, smashing things, uh, putting holes through my door, things that were not appropriate. I was still doing when I was severe, and I know for me, I was more of I think it's ambivalent type. It's where you fluctuate between being super quiet, where you have your quiet BPD and you're internalizing, and then sometimes it will flash out, and you'll be like in a rage or just upset because you don't want to be like, you don't want to feel sad. And I feel like the rage was almost like a protection mechanism that was coming out to protect me from being too sad, because I would get so sad that I instead of harming myself, I would let out the energy towards the individual that I saw that was affecting me at the time. Um, BVD is a really fascinating topic. I mean, when we get into the root causes and how it manifests, I mean, they say that there's over, I think, 250 something subtypes now that they've found with borderline, um, and how it can manifest. And I think this is really interesting because ultimately it's a personality disorder, right? So when I was talking about some of the root causes, going into like severances of parental guardians and talking about systematic politics and all of that in my um, previous videos, and I was also talking about politics of child grooming, sexual assault, how common that is in still in our current generation, and how we're recovering from that. Anyone who says that that's not the case really needs to evaluate that, because um, I mean, look at the last 1,000 years on how they use concubines, how they use women, how wars distributed women and children, to how just the systematic racism politics that were going on at the time, cut their hair off, even though their hair was part of their identity, um, remove them from their families. They essentially wanted to create the population to be more white, or use this population as a servant to being white, or before that it was whatever superior culture. Before it was white people, it was whatever superior culture that were sort of experimenting on these sorts of things. And currently, when we look at the top dirtiest industries in the world, we have number one, during COVID, got boosted up, was child trafficking, and human trafficking was number one. And number two is drugs. And then number three is weapon distributions. So it's obviously still a thing when we look at just at the amount of women that still experience sexual assault or sexual harassment. And in our current media, to the Hollywood scene, all these things that we're sort of around, like these sort of embedments are there. And we're actually, as a collective, rewiring and starting to address some of these issues more firsthand only in the last couple decades since the internet has come out, because these things were so hushed or not given the right organization and force to actually combat these things more effectively as they are being combated right now. So when I talk about borderline personality disorder, we know it's a personality disorder, and that's just a given. And there's much to be debated about in basically when you have the first moments with your parents or your guardian, your core personality is being formed. In my situation, being a borderline, I actually have a theory that my mother was a borderline. And I actually have a theory that her mother may have been a borderline, misdiagnosed as bipolar, because she was a victim of child trafficking at a young age. And I actually think that she may have been borderline, but misprescribed as bipolar for the time. But I can't prove that. But either way, my mother would have had those core personality distortions happening. And if I'm correct, what I theorize is that my mother always kind of dealt with two personalities, even with bipolar or with borderline. She would have essentially had two personalities. Those two personalities was dismissive and anxious. So she wasn't just one type of parent to her kid. She was two. And because she was two types of parents to her kid, there's, I think, this anxious, dismissive fluctuation that goes on with their future kids. That's why I think it's an interesting debate when they are talking about like is it like more of a dismissive attachment styles that they form, or is it like more of an anxious? I'm like, well, could it be that we're actually both? Because we are around parents that exhibited both, because they had two personality traits going on. That's what makes borderline interesting. But that's what I theorize. That's not an actual fact that's been written in anything that I've read yet. But if there is an article or anything like that, feel free to share if that has been found. But I do theorize that the core personality years for borderlines may actually have been both anxious and dismissive. Maybe quiet BPDs may have had more dismissive parents than anxious. And I actually, think that maybe on the subtypes that they may have had one or the other, even as a possibility. But I do theorize that there are a larger percentage of borderlines that may have had a parent that exhibited these two personality switches, and that they developed basically an attachment style to both of these personality switches, and neither of them were necessarily healthy. So yeah, that's just what I theorized for that sort of degree. When we talk about identity issues, core personalities can be affected through those first few years in our development. Though, what I argue is that identity can really start to form more through puberty. And puberty is when our hormones are going through all these sorts of things. And I think every human being on the planet goes through a sort of identity crisis, and I think we go through it again in our midlife crisis. Like, we call it a midlife crisis for a reason, because we kind of want to see where we fit in this whole, algorithm of things. But during puberty, it's definitely a phase for everybody where we kind of go through this identity sort of relationship, trying to figure out who we are. And obviously, for people who didn't have the right attachment style, going through those phases are a lot more intense and a lot more troubled and lost and confused on where they lay in those in that spectrum, so to speak, and maybe more explosive or lashing out, trying to figure out where they identify in. And the other part is that if they're around an environment that is trying to push an identity onto them, that can cause sorts of borderlines, or that quiet sort of borderline stuff going on, or ambivalent or rage too. But what I'm saying by that is, I think through borderline families, if they were susceptible to a narcissist, or if they were susceptible to this form of abuse where they wanted their kid to fit a mold or a particular image of what they portrayed them as, and they weren't fitting that image, or they were trying to fit that image, there's that confliction already starting to essentially happen, which can cause unhealthy identity crises, which can be a common trait for borderline. And for me, Eliza, what do you do? Well, for me, I've gotten accustomed. Like, I'm an artist. I've been drawing for like over 20 years now. And like, I really love what I do, and I love going into the spectrums of like these inner perspectives. Like, you'll see mountains and trees and a sun, and like fish and little beehives and the fish eyes, and I just kind of explore in my sort of art, you know, I love working with color. I've been doing art for like over 20 years, so I've got tons and tons and tons and tons of artworks. And I do music and I do poetry. But these were also the things I have to say that, like when I was growing up, my environment, my mother's side, that I was growing into, she didn't want me to be an artist. She thought that wouldn't make money doing it. This was a bad idea. And I had to, that if I was to do an art career, then go into graphic design and apply for like a studio and get a full-time job doing that, and that's how you'll survive. And for me, it was like, no, I want to paint things, I want to draw things, I want to be a fine artist, and I want to get into like doing some art therapy. My mom, she thought that the art therapy idea was like a more of a tangible idea, like you can make money doing that. But then, I ended up volunteering for free, doing co-collaboration arts in a lot of frontline actions. So I was just doing these forms of therapies, and many of times, like I've had the opportunity to paint with like thousands of people, citywide, even famous artists, and co-collaborate on art. And basically, I the amount of times that I heard from women and from guys that, oh, this is helping me. I don't feel depressed showing up to these art gatherings once a week. I feel like lately I don't feel like I have to kill myself, with some of the statements that I was receiving just by even offering a service that was engaging through the arts. And I feel like the arts are such a universal language that they can't define some of these emotional things that are like uncommunicatable, like when we can't communicate them. The arts are like a universal language, so we're able to really express things that are non-definitive, or things that we may not have definitions to yet. And so like art, music, poetry, crafting, whether that be jewelry, making clothes, finding some form of hobby that is creative, to me is really, really important. And I think it's like a keystone to being where I am now in my therapy, and working on my health. And for someone else that's not creative, what I could suggest is maybe joining like a martial art, or joining a sport, swimming, Tai Chi. Tai Chi is an interesting one. I find that it would probably be beneficial, particularly just because of breath work, and mindfulness. Dialect behavioral therapies goes into breath work and mindfulness. So some of these practices, there's a wide array of them, but some of them may actually assist you towards that journey. Last video, I was just getting into basically how some disorders or some diagnoses may be attracted to substance use, and how, unfortunately, there's this huge taboo on substance use, and there's this huge, combat on wanting to criminalize substance use, but it's still commonly used as, in our population, it's commonly done, whether that be through alcohol, through tobacco, which is one I'm still working on, whether that be through sex, whether that be through um, whether that be through like hard drugs. There's an addiction. There is a codependency happening with something, and I was trying to talk about how some disorders they may have an attraction to these sorts of codependencies because they are receiving some form of benefit from it, whether that be, oh, they're numbing their feelings and they're feeling relaxed because they're always anxious all the time, whether that be that they're calming down their brain, because I was talking about how high functioning people actually benefit from things like nicotine or things like meth and cocaine. They could be, where to the normal population, these things actually like bring you up. To this demographic, a high functioning demographic, it actually calms them down chemically. So they're having a chemical attraction to these substances. I was talking about my codependency substance issues throughout my years, and how I had an attraction to particularly cocaine and MDMA. These things help calm me down from being high functioning all the time. What got me off of these things was the ADHD medication. The ADHD medication helped me get off of the stimulants that I was on already, that were benefiting me in the way that they were benefiting me. The only problem with it was that eventually I created a high tolerance to even the ADHD medication. And it was still affecting my immune system in a negative sense. Either way, it's like some people, they go from ADHD meds and they start using higher end stimulants. For me, I wanted to get off of the higher end stimulants. I went into a more prescribed sort of regulated issuement with the doctor, so that I could regulate what's happening, because I didn't want to be an accidental overdose. Because I know that in street supply, the reality is that you don't know who it comes from unless you have a really good tester kit, unless you're actually being like, proactive and all that sort of jazz. The reality is that you're still part of a statistic that can be susceptible to an accidental overdose, and that's just reality. I actually watched a lot of my close friends be victims to being an accidental overdose. A lot of these close friends all had mental health issues, that they did not cope with their trauma the right way, and all of these friends did not actually get the right supports that they probably could have actually utilized to be in a better spot. And unfortunately, they were victims to this sort of demographic. The reason I talk about this is because, the stories are, it just seems to repeat over and over again. One person is a victim of a rape gangbang, and another person is a victim to a mother who committed suicide. Another person is a victim to losing their wife in an accident. There are these sorts of correlations of really high traumatic events that I see that are happening to this demographic. And so what is it? What is the root cause to these things? When we say, oh, like drugs are such an issue on the streets, it's like, yeah, but what are the root causes to these things? And is it treatable? Should we be backing up our court systems through criminalizing essentially people who just need a little bit more support. And that's why I've always felt that, instead of criminalizing the homeless and acting like they don't exist, realize that their core symptoms are because of a correlation of things that may have occurred in someone's life, and that, mental health is an essential. And right now we use it too much as a business. The system has even utilized mental health as a business to carry out racist policies and to carry out targeting certain demographics. And that's really, really unfortunate. And until that changes as well, that we'll start to see a shift. And it will trickle almost instantaneously because, for example, if you were to offer immediately someone who's on the streets who doesn't have any supports, they come in for a shelter program and you give them a, mental health counselor right away. Like there are steps that we could be doing to actually be bettering the mental health of our ecology and of the society. And essentially it does affect the economics of society too, because when we have a mental health crisis, these things are linked with depressions. These things are linked with economic depressions. And so, or like, for example, when you're coming from a war country, there are a lot of people who are going to be having PTSD and mental health issues. And so we have to kind of stop using mental health as a business and really start to see it as almost like a fundamental basis to how we function, and not be stigmatizing it so much to want to just criminalize, which I'm seeing a lot, even in our politics with, minimum mandatories. And I'm not saying like, I see like the two extreme windows. Like, I'm not saying if like someone went out and started stabbing someone or really harming someone, I don't think that they should have mental leave. That's where I draw a line. I've been hearing some policies where they want to be really progressive and say, oh, like these people are able to get out so easily. And to me, I feel like if you really go out of the way to really stab someone or to physically harm someone with a weapon, that there should be more regulations or care on ensuring that these people don't just get out into the public right away, that these people are actually being evaluated a little bit more on some of the root causes of what actually caused that. And in order to actually like get into the root causes of what actually caused that behavior, I mean, that's like minimum 26 weeks, 52 weeks that person is going to have to go through just to get evaluated on where they're exhibiting that behavior. And then it's like the treatment program for that could take some time. And so for me, I think that there are some things that I see in the current criminalization of mental health that I'm in complete disagreement of, but there are some things that I see that are being used, for example, where they're just claiming ambiguous statements like this is a mental health case, and keeping people against their will when they haven't actually done super extremes. And so, where's the line is all I'm going to say on that, to consider about mental health and mental health in business. And so anyways, I need to remind everybody that I am part ADHD, so that means I'm high functioning. Sometimes I can ramble about topics and sometimes I'll like switch off on where I'm going in my topics. But if you actually listen to my series and you actually listen to where I'm going with this, I'm just trying to invoke some thought processes about mental health, and things that we should maybe consider when dealing with mental health, from my lived experience through borderline personality disorder. Um, so that's kind of the things that I've been going into. In order to get off of the stimulants, the ADHD medication, the thing is that I was receiving benefits from basically these stimulants. So my brain would calm down from stimulants. That meant that I could organize, I could clean. I was very high functioning with stimulants. It was quite the opposite. I wasn't actually getting the negative effects that other people were getting. Like I could watch other people do this substance and basically they would have like these rage fits, or they would have like these high energies, or they'd be sweating or just yapping. And for me, it was like the complete opposite. He's like super calm, like let's clean. Like I I kind of thought that was a bit weird, right? But anyways, these stimulants, these things were benefits, and that's why I was attracted to using these things. But in the long run, again, they're band-aids. And my doctor said to me, by the time you're 35, you're gonna die by a heart attack. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, you're gonna die by a heart attack because your dosage is so high, and your tolerance is so high, and you're mixing it with these other prescriptions, which were like for anxiety. And they were telling me that this is just not a good thing. This is going to kill you. And ultimately, I think that's the message that we need to understand with any drug and any prescription, that ultimately there are long-term effects to these things. And they should not be necessarily our go-to way of necessarily for treatment. They should be seen as like band-aids, because that's essentially what they are. They are band-aids to maintenance a symptom until that symptom is treated. And then in order to find that symptom's treatment, you need to find the root cause, right? So for me, I was prescribed from my doctor a CBD treatment. And this is interesting because you gotta understand with the whole war on pot, and how it's very, very touchy, and it's interesting because for me it has transformed my life to be very much so better. I don't need to use other prescription drugs. I'm not attracted to doing any other thing. I feel pretty regulated on having just marijuana involved in my life. And sometimes I smoke cigarettes as well, which I'm working on quitting. But for the higher end stuff that was really killing me, that was risking me to like have a potential OD, I have removed that from my life, and I am much healthier for it. So for the CBD treatment, if you're from a country where it's illegal to use hemp or THC products, you can get CBD from Ying Lang. You can get Ying Lang tea. If you drink Ying Lang tea, you'll have the same effects of getting that CBD component that you're looking for. If you're able to get CBD drops, that is great. If you're into smoking and you have a habit where you wanted to smoke things, so for people who may have smoked a pipe in other pipes for stimulants, or for people who smoke cigarettes or whatever that may be, smoking CBD might be beneficial for them as a sort of transitional treatment. I know that for when I was going through major anxiety attacks during withdrawals, CBD was a huge help for me. Um, the other thing is that I needed to get blood tests done to see where my supplementary levels were in my system, mainly checking my iron and my B12 levels. The reason for that is because I was not eating properly with these codependencies and with my disorders. It wasn't that I didn't eat, because I definitely ate food, but I wasn't eating properly. So I wasn't actually attaining the right minerals and vitamins that I required in my system. And I noticed that my B12 levels were lower, as well as my iron levels. The reality is that might vary for other people. They might have something off in their blood levels that can show that they have a deficiency in something. Deficiencies are a huge thing when it comes to mood, and the reality is people with disorders tend to have deficiencies as well, because they're not eating the right nutrients, or they're not eating the right nutrients that they may be lacking too. Some disorders, they target certain receptors, certain things in our brains that kind of eat at us. So for example, people who are ADHD have receptors with our dopamine uptakes and with our serotonin uptakes that are not the same as people who don't have ADHD. And same thing with borderline. I think borderline, it's the inhibitors that uptake the serotonin. Or there's just the receptors that uptake the serotonin component. And what's interesting is, CBD actually promotes growth to those inhibitors, and actually starts promoting like health to those sorts of inhibitors. So there is a benefit there usually, because people who lack the inhibitors for serotonin, that there is foods and there are things that you can eat that help those uptakes. So CBD is great for the inhibitor uptakes and promoting growth for that serotonin sort of receptors. But also for foods, the top 5 foods, just look up top 5 foods for serotonin replacement. I have a few just on the top of my head that I can think of. The number 1 food is blueberries. I actually, whenever I was going through major depressions, I would have to buy a pint of blueberries, and I was eating a pint of blueberries a day. This actually helped my mood majorly. I even for when I was using and I was having stimulant crashes, blueberries, I was eating a pint of blueberries. The reason is because my serotonin levels were super, super low. And blueberries would help remove that sort of brain fog, that sort of feeling. It's amazing what blueberries can do. So that's another thing that I'm going to be promoting. If you have any sort of serotonin uptake problems, which can happen with many disorders out there, not just borderline. And sauerkraut. So sauerkraut's really good for depression. Also, like lavender is really good for anxiety and for stress. Chamomile is also really good. Organic chamomile is also really good for anxiety and for stress. If you have lung and breathing problems, thyme is really good. White thyme as a air freshener. So put it in your airstream, like an essential oil. These things can stimulate sorts of relief for us as well. I'm just gonna keep going. Raw cacao. So they always say, women are super attracted to wet chocolate, and the reason is because we go through serotonin twice as fast as men. So when women are bitchy and whiny, it could be a great indication that we just need a snack. And the reason is because back in the day, we were the collectors for berries and for that sort of like primal, like your ancestors were collecting food on a regular basis, while men were going off and hunting or doing other traits. And so because women were picking and cooking and doing all these things, we were snacking a lot. So we're more intrinsically snackers, essentially. Like we need to eat more regularly than men. And that's actually proven. So yeah, if you're a woman and you're going through an emotional disorder or a mood disorder, these things could essentially help you. And there are plenty of herbs and plenty of foods out there that can help promote some of the things that I'm talking about. These are just some of the things that worked for me. And it could be circumstantial for other people. Like, for example, one circumstance for me was my iron levels. That might not be for everybody, but for my iron levels, what helped me was oysters and clams, because they have a large amount of, iron content that I was ingesting in my foods. And, then you got to consider how your body processes these things. For example, like some irons, they require, you to have other supplements in your body to be able to process those irons, essentially. So it's an interesting relation, but if you have a disorder, I actually highly suggest to actually look into your vitamin deficiencies and to look into your B12 deficiency and to look into ingesting foods that might be helpful for your dopamine or for your serotonin. Yeah. So I kind of got into that. And the reason I kind of got into that was to get into the physical relation of mental health, because that was an ongoing thing. And unfortunately, like I said in my last video, what I noticed is like, there's this black and white thinking for borderlines, and like oftentimes there's this not want to get help, because borderlines deal with a huge stigma. And what I meant by that was, like, I was giving the example of when I went to the hospital and instead of actually giving me antibiotics for being sick, they wanted to just admit me and give me psychiatric evaluation and didn't even bother to check my throat. It was really disturbing. And I thought, this needs to change, because like in any mental health, there is usually physical symptoms that are occurring, and the physical symptoms are fucking real. It's not like they don't exist. And that's a concern, because like we often demonstrate in our ideas that borderlines are so dramatic that we make up these physical symptoms about ourselves. But at the same time, I need you to understand that there are for sure physical symptoms happening in borderlines. And there are for sure physical symptoms happening in most people who have disorders, because it's impossible. I feel like these chemistries, unless we start to be eating regularly a very particular thing that really works for us, that food and diet and all these things aren't related, because they are. And I know they are because I was attracted to certain foods that worked really, really well for me because I naturally lacked having certain chemicals in my brain. So we need to change that whole philosophy on mental health. And I think we need to put a little bit more importance on researching vitamin deficiencies as well when we're dealing with mental health and mood disorders, and going into foods that might be actually helpful for serotonin uptakes, that are really good for mood disorders. The fact that we're not exploring that to the degree that we should be really bothers me. Anyways, I'm gonna continue going on with some of my toxic traits that I was getting into with borderline when I was severe. I'll probably be doing that next video. But I got into some of the vitamin supplementary stuff today. I got into some of the root causes I was just discussing about. I'm kind of doing an overview. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's sort of insights on borderline personality disorder. My lived journey. All right, bye.